Everybody. Welcome to another episode of Three Questions With. This week we're with Natasha Plowman. Thank you for joining us, Natasha.
Very welcome.
I'm really excited to talk to you because we've spent a lot of time speaking to people in permanent roles. You've worked for some amazing organisations, both on agency and in-house, including kind of 6 years at Diageo and a number of other organisations of that ilk. But over the last few years, you've been doing some really interesting interim works. I think the corporate affairs function is one that actually leans heavily on really good senior interim people because, as we know, it's always underfunded, always under-resourced, and needs people like you. So we'll go into the questions. Let's start with that dreaded dinner party question. So what do you actually do?
And it is the dreaded dinner party question at the moment for me because I have lots of fingers and lots of different pies doing so many different things, and especially since going out on my own and creating Spinning Red. Now, I've had Spinning Red for about 10 years. I've dipped in and out of it over the years. So I had a stint going back permanently with HSBC, and then I've had those longer term agency roles. But now I'm fully in the fractional consultancy world. And why I find it really difficult is because I'm not attached to any particular business. So my business is attached to other companies or other organizations or people. And so it ranges from doing media training and stakeholder messaging training and helping companies have impact and influence on what they talk about. It ranges from running workshops and conferences and helping businesses develop their strategy and how they ensure that what they say and what they do ladders to what the business needs to be doing. And the big thing for me that cuts across everything is, cutting through a lot of the crap that you've got within this industry and a lot of noise. That's also the name of my new podcast, Cutting Through. And it's not called Cutting Through the Crap, and I know you really wanted it to be, James, but that came from, I love comms, and I love the comms when it has impact and influence. What frustrates me is it's often born by kind of just talking at people without really what does this mean for the business that I'm supporting? What does it mean for the audiences that I'm meant to be influencing or influencing some kind of change with? And, for me, Spinning Red, so much of the ethos about the work that I do is just cutting through a lot of that and making sure that we deliver the comms that audiences need to hear and when they need to hear it. So that's a lot of my paid stuff. But before you go on, I've got to talk about my pro bono stuff as well, because I think that's always really important because it's around the industry and how do we influence the industry to be better. And that's where Break the Silence came about, because it was around, we see so many women, and particularly women of my age, leaving the industry or going independent or being pushed out. And we need to start changing the dialogue around that for everyone, men and women. And Break the Silence is about making those conversations happen so we don't see people leaving the industry because they're just not seen as relevant, which is weird when you've got this level of experience and knowledge.
Well, and that was one of the first conversations we had, was when I posted a bit of a rant on the issues around racism in the industry. And, it's remarkable, isn't it? We're in a country where in less than 5 years, 50% of working age people will be over 50. Yeah, for some reason, organisations still seem to prioritise young talent rather than experience. And I think particularly in corporate affairs, where you need people who can advise the most senior people in a business, having bench strength in your corporate affairs function is incredibly important.
And it's also the fixation with needing everyone permanently and full time. And I think there's a real need for this industry. And it's starting a bit with marketing, but I think it's actually better suited for comms and corporate affairs because you don't need someone like me full time, but you need to have access to the strategic advice and the visibility and the calmness that comes with experience on the issues you're having. And then you can guide teams to execute and train those leaders of the future. And that's my real worry of the industry, is we're seeming to kind of be cutting out the older people who've got really great experience. And then you're cutting out the more junior people, and where's your bench? It's just gone. And I just think there's a better discussion that needs to happen within the industry about that.
Totally. And it has to start with, there's a degree of honesty that's required around that as well. I think people often unwittingly fall into bad hiring practices. I don't think people are going out of their way to not hire senior people of a certain age, but I think we have to kind of change the discussion. And sometimes it just takes a leader who is comfortable enough in their own skin to say, yeah, actually, I want someone who's as senior as I am to report into me. Why wouldn't you? That just makes us a better function.
Exactly. And you get people who are just like, like don't want to play the game anymore, want to do the work. And the other thing I think we need to get rid of is this whole fixation on industry experience and knowledge. The whole point and the power of comms people is that we are able, and we should be able to, connect the dots and see those connections across different industries.
And comms is about being curious, and people are very well suited to be able to adapt to different sectors and functions. I just want to go back on that kind of broadcast piece, because it's something that we talk about all the time. It happens a lot in internal comms, but it happens externally as well, where organizations have slipped into a kind of broadcast approach where we just talk about everything and no one cares, no one's listening, no one's engaging. Have you found, since doing more of the interim piece, that it's easier as an outsider coming in to hold that mirror up to businesses and get them to see why it's not working for them, and why less is more in that situation? Do you think that makes it easier?
Absolutely, it makes it easier. It makes it easier, particularly if you've got no skin in the game of your own
Yeah.
P&L, if you're an agency having to sell loads of different content and different
Yeah.
things. And I think it's really taking a step back and kind of asking, who are your audiences? And this whole elusive, our audience is everyone, doesn't exist, because then you've got to step back and think, well, what do you want from the individual kind of stakeholders, consumers, employees? What do you want them to do differently or think and feel differently? And I think when you start asking and probing those questions around what is the impact that you want to have on other people, then you can start opening up, well, do you really need to be communicating this in this way? And it's all about the levers you pull. And that's the other thing. Then you've got kind of teams saying, I need to be doing media and outreach and media because that justifies my existence. Or I need to be doing social media and everything because that justifies what I'm doing. And actually, it's the levers you pull for the outcome you want to have, which is more effective. And I think when you're external, then you can have that conversation and say, sometimes you don't need to be doing the media relations, but you need to be upweighting your own channels. You need to be upweighting how you use SEO and now GEO more effectively. You need to be upweighting the conversations and the direct stakeholder relationships you're having, rather than thinking you're going to reach those people through the media, because the tick box of activation is your problem. And that's where strategy becomes so much more important, not as some kind of dusty tomb of kind of information. Real clarity on what you're doing is delivering for the business that you're supporting.
Yeah, really. And it's about impact and how do you...
Impact and influence, my two favorite words that I get very bored of saying, but I seem to say quite.
But they're important, and that's how you justify the existence of the function at the end of the day. Brilliant. That is a fantastic answer, and I think we touched upon some subjects that we could talk about for hours from that.
We probably could.
Maybe that's for another time. So, looking back over your career, then, is there a sort of singular piece of advice that you'd want to offer your more junior self?
Yeah, there's a thing that I've been thinking about a lot, and particularly as I'm doing more coaching or training of senior leaders on their impact and influence. And I think it's really to get to know who you are a lot sooner. What makes you tick, what your triggers are, and own it honestly and openly about who you are as a person. And I think the other thing is, you can't change people, but the only thing you can influence and impact is how you respond and react to things.
Yeah.
And, and I think as I've gotten older, that ability to be a little bit more accepting of other people and who they are, and as it impacts me, is so important. I think I would have loved to have done that a lot younger. And I think that honesty and openness that, everyone's imperfect and we're all learning, and the vulnerability of knowing what we need to know and how we reach out to people, I think is something that if people were more open to that in more junior times would be really good. And I also think coaching and support should happen at a more junior point in your career to kickstart that understanding and thinking. And as we change and as we age as well, is quite important. So that's the thing I would like to just be a bit, just get to know yourself a little bit better and own that. And the more you know yourself, the more you can recognize other people's differences,
Yeah.
and not in a judgmental way, but just in a, this is who they are, I suppose. And I think it's,
From their
and just be
experience,
accepting
the
of
way
it.
they've
But,
experienced the world.
of course, there are people who I don't agree. Like, there's a lot of people who don't like, it's also, there are also going to be people who don't like you and are triggered by you. And that is not on you to solve. That is on, yes, flex, yes, recognize it, yes, understand the impact you have on other people, but it's not for you to necessarily change or solve that.
Yeah, totally. That point as well on kind of, you can take on board criticism, but you must understand that it's probably a reflection of self as much as it is a reflection of you. And it's finding that balance of how do I grow without letting outside influences dim my light, if that makes sense. I've had a couple of people who I've known in my career who have had big moments in their careers that went against them, and you can just see it's impacted them in a fairly permanent way. And I think that's always a really sad thing to see.
And that's the whole thing about getting to know yourself and kind of knowing what feedback to take on board and what feedback
Yeah,
you don't need to. And I think there's knowing us, and this is core to communicators. The best communicators are really self-reflective and
yeah.
understand who they are. And I think it's a really important thing to talk about more.
My trick for knowing whether I should be listening or not is if it's made me angry. If someone's pointed out something I'm doing wrong and it makes me angry, it probably means it's something I need to work on, because you're angry because deep down you know they're right.
Yeah.
My wife is the master of pointing out things like that make me angry. And,
Yeah.
Once I've stomped around for a bit and slammed a few drawers, I very quickly work out that, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, she's got a point.
Yeah. Name those feelings, understand, be aware of those feelings. And the more you can kind of say, well, does this serve me or does this not serve me? And, that ability to just take that little bit of a step back and understand it.
I think that's a really important piece of advice. And it's very easy in your career, I think, particularly early on, to focus on what you think other people need instead of what you actually want. And if you're not happy in a job, it might be because it doesn't actually suit your skill set, and maybe you should just be thinking about what matters to you. Great. So if you hadn't been working in the world of corporate affairs and communications, what would you be doing?
I was thinking about this.
Okay.
I probably would have gone into politics. I always wanted to be involved in politics. I started my career in politics, and I started, and I was very active at university with Emily's List, which is an organisation in Australia to get more women into politics. I wanted to be the first female Prime Minister of Australia. Julia Gillard took that mantle. And, she is an example, and we're seeing so many more examples of just the cesspit that is politics for women. So that's probably what I wouldn't want to necessarily do now, although I do have often these aspirations to somehow do it differently. But that's probably what I would have done.
Totally. Thank you so much. That was a really enjoyable conversation. I could definitely carry on for hours with this, but it's going to be fun trying to narrow it down to a consumable number for people. But really appreciate it, Natasha. Thank you for your time.
Great to be on. Thank you.